This episode of Life Trippin' is called Whose Trip Are You On? And it's about how to start taking control of your own trip. Because that's just it. It's your life trip. Have you ever been on a vacation that you had no say in planning? Maybe you were fine with that, and maybe it was even awesome, at least partly because someone else planned it. On the other hand, maybe you didn't get to do or see a lot of what you might have wanted because it wasn't in the schedule. My dad was a great dad, but a lousy vacationer. His idea of a trip was to get wherever we were going as quickly and efficiently as possible. So as a kid, I lived in Nevada, and we'd drive every year or two to visit my uncle and aunt in southern Arizona for vacation, passing within about 75 miles of the Grand Canyon. And although I'm pretty sure my brother and I must have asked about it a million times, I never got to actually visit the Grand Canyon until I went with my wife many years later. And then, of course, I became the kind of dad who stopped at every giant ball of twine or dinosaur statue I could find, thereby warping my own kids in a completely different way. All of us start off with someone else mapping our lives, or as my good friend Tommy Brown puts it, writing the script. How and when you take over the planning or writing depends on a lot of things, but I am 100% convinced that until you do, your life trip isn't really your own, and you won't be truly, deeply happy, engaged, or fulfilled in your life. Tommy is a longtime friend, a former camp director, a pastor, certified professional coach, adjunct professor, chef. I'm just going to stop right there. If, as you listen to this podcast, you think to yourself, yeah, that's kind of how I feel, or just get a gut feeling that you might not really be on your own life trip, shoot me an email to dana@lifetrippin.com, and we'll talk about the possibility of some free life coaching and maybe recording a session for use on a future episode of Life Trippin'.
So I want to say first that I owe Tommy a double thank you because, as I mentioned in the introduction, this is take two, and so it has taken twice as much of his time at least, and I really appreciate his willingness to help me out as I continue to sort through the technology issues around podcasting. Tommy and I have somewhat similar backgrounds in some ways, but what's most significant, I think, for me is that we've kind of been on some parallel life paths at times, or maybe the truth is that I've just been kind of following in his footsteps because every once in a while, Tommy would do something new or different, and I would be at a place where I was ready for a change, and I'd think, wow, what Tommy's doing looks pretty cool right now. Maybe I'll try that. And one of those examples was campus ministry. We both spent several years in campus ministry. And when I was considering doing that kind of work, I actually went and spent time with him in his setting, which was really helpful to me. We both have two young adult sons who are on their paths that we have helped to shape, but are now figuring out how not to keep shaping in the same way and step back from. We are both fans of really good beer and great conversations. And for today, what's maybe most relevant is that we both have spent significant time working with folks who were on life trips that they had not planned for themselves. And that was clear to us. And these folks were either at a point where they were questioning or not questioning, not allowing themselves to question who had made that plan and whether they wanted to try to change that. So my first question for you today, Tommy, is what are some of the things that you believe helped empower those who actually started asking questions about how to make the life trip their own?
So in campus ministry, especially working with a lot of students who were following, I guess, the expectations of others, and then beginning to realize as they approach graduation, wow, what do I want to, spend my life doing? How do I want to live this thing called life? How do I want to do my journey? And they begin really asking those questions. Some of them Some of them get past graduation, get into their first job, and then it hits them, wow, this is not what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so what I do with those folks, what I have spent time doing, and that's a lot of what got me into coaching in the first place, was to begin to help them see how they're following the expectations of others and really begin to think about what it is that they want to contribute to the world, and how do they want to live what they value, live the life that they want to live, and to do that in a conscious, thoughtful way. And so that's, it's that some of the students, some of the young adults that I've worked with, some of the people that I've worked with just go through it and they're like, okay, I'll do this. But others are definitely, they get to a point where, nope, got to be doing some rethinking of this. And that may be about changing majors. That may be about deciding whether to stay in school or not. That may be, a life crisis or a life change that they are going through. And to be in a position to help them think that through and maybe do some strategies or look at some other folks who have, not being the first to navigate all that is something I've tried to help offer.
So one of the things you just said made me wonder, because part of what I heard there is how sometimes it's those things that we don't expect, those crises or, things fall apart, the plans start to break down in some fashion. And that for some folks is almost what it takes, right? To create an opening for them to start thinking about that for themselves.
Oh, sure. That's in every crisis, every moment of chaos, there's a lot more opportunities than in some sure path. Path. So those are really opportunities for when they do have those moments of looking with them at, okay, so now what? That might not have worked out as you had thought, or you've come to a realization that that's someone else's expectations for your life. So now what? Let's use this opportunity and take that forward, which is, that is what we do in coaching.
Right.
So,
and that's that level 3 energy we've talked about. It's like, well, it is what it is. So now what's possible, right? We are where we are. What's happened has happened. Can't change that, but what we can change is our perspective, right? So, so one of the things I know, and we did talk about this in take 1, and I wanted to bring that up again too. And it was, how your book played in, writing your book and how all of that, came from and also spoke to, those perhaps moments of opening that folks experienced in all kinds of different ways.
So the book that I wrote, it's about 5-6 years ago now, is a book called Unscripted, and it was written while I was still doing campus ministry. So it's very much from a faith perspective and looking at, I was preaching a sermon probably 4 or 5 years before that, from a passage from Acts, which I think is one of the funniest images in Scripture, wherein the disciples are on the mountaintop and Jesus is ascending to heaven, and the disciples just keep looking up as if waiting for him to come right back and tell them what to do. And 2 angels or 2 beings come up and say, what are you doing? And it's only at that point where they realize that Jesus isn't coming back the way that they've been anticipating, their expectations, that the disciples truly begin to wrestle with what it is they're supposed to be about. And it's in that next several passages I really picked apart the following passages of what the disciples, those who were following Jesus in that community in Jerusalem at that time, what Luke, the writer of Acts, says that they did to begin to get on a path that then led to them being the apostles, the disciples of Jesus that he had called them to be. And so I parallel that with what students might be going through. And the name of the book is Unscripted. In that unscripted time where after 17 years of following the script of going, I'm going to first grade, I'm going to on and on, third grade, high school, into college, then they graduate. And there's no script for that. They've been following the script that their parents have set.
Yep.
You and I are really prime examples of what's going to be more typical for these young adults, which is to have multiple career experiences, to have multiple times in your life where you look and go, oh, well, that happened. I learned a lot from it. Now what? Mm-hmm. And learning at a young age to write one's own script, to make one's own choices is what I think then what the disciples began to do. I go through the stages of what the disciples did in the book, or in that I take from Acts that they did. They gathered and connected with others. They really thought deeply about it. They found some mentors and some guides who could help them. They rethought what it is that they're supposed to do, and began to catch a spirit and a passion for what they then could contribute to the world. My hope is that they'll look for folks and to connect with a variety of folks, including some coaches who might be able to help them ask some key questions during that time.
Well, and I want to come to that in a minute. Mentors and other folks that mm-hmm. Are already on a trip, and that we look at and think, I wonder how that person, what that person might tell me about their trip. But I want to kind of reach to the common thread or theme that I heard in your book, because I expect that some listeners may not have a particular faith perspective, but what I heard you describing was the idea of beginning to write your own script, tell your own story. And a phrase that came to mind is reinventing yourself. If you reinvent yourself in a way that is different, what would you want to be different about, that, or about your story, or about your script?
Yeah, it's what have I learned during all of my life up to now, and how do I want to apply that? As an educator as well, I've looked at a lot of what we do with college students, a lot of what we do with education in general is provide a lot of materials to begin to ask questions and say, okay, how do I apply this? How do I continue to ask questions? And how do I take this and live it? Especially in the type of work that I've been in. How do you do it in social work? How do you do it in recreation management? How do you do it in ministry? Those are a lot of the folks that I've worked with, but it applies, I think, to any career. Is you're always going to be in a learning mode, and you're always going to be in receiving more information and how you take it. So learning first how to ask those questions rather than that's where the writing one's own script comes in, is that so much of education is about responding with the right answer. Mm-hmm. Yep. And they get to a point in college and realize that it's not, I hope they get to the point of realizing that it's not about providing the right answer. It's about asking the right question that's going to lead you to the next question, that's going to lead you to the next question, that's going to lead you to the next question. And there's your journey. And so many of them come to that point of graduation, which we call commencement, which is a beginning.
Ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. They get to that point where they think they're completing, and really they're just at the starting gate. And they're, whoa, I thought I was where things now happen to me, but they now have to go out, and so many of them get into the world. And there's lots more jobs now than there were a few years ago, but still it's, they're going to be waiting tables for a while. They're going to be doing lots of things. But in that time, this is one of the key things, is that in that time where it feels like you've done all this work to get to this point and nothing's happening, that 40-day period, using the biblical metaphor, what is it that you can be doing in that time? And there's so much that you can be doing as far as really digging into, okay, what now? I didn't get that, $100,000 a year job right out of college that everybody had promised me. What
and I don't have my flying car yet either. And I'm confused about that, frankly, but.
Exactly. Eventually what happened was I got a job as a assistant director, as a Vista volunteer job, like AmeriCorps, working at a halfway house for people coming out of prison. And it has been that job where I realized that, what I am good at is facilitating community. I'm good at working with people. I've got skills in those sorts of things. And it connects with theater in that what I loved about theater and what I was passionate about when I was doing theater was the process, the group of people coming together and working together to create this thing. And so everything that I've done since then, since I began to realize that, and I then went to seminary, has really been about, I can look back at it now and go, everything I've done and what I'm still doing is about facilitating community happening. It's about facilitating people coming together and connecting. And in so doing, getting to know one another, getting to know themselves, getting to know, working towards some sort of goal together. And, I've done that in youth ministry. I've done that in camp and conference ministry. I've done that in college ministry, campus ministry. And now I'm doing that in food ministry, or my work in Farm Cafe, where really what we do at the Farm Cafe, which is Feed All Regardless of Means Cafe, is set the table so that community can happen. And the Feed All Regardless of Means Cafe is the best church I've ever been a part of.
There's another thing, too, that we mentioned, but I want to make sure we grab onto, and that's the idea of mentorship. And that, certainly one of the, best, easiest places to find mentors is in a community of some kind. So let's talk about mentors, and what they look like, how do you find them? What distinguishes somebody that, that you look at and say, I wonder, how getting to know that person, and whether we call them a mentor or not,
right.
Maybe they are that, but what does that look like?
Yeah, in youth ministry, the term is non-parental guarantor. A lot of research was done, and that's the terminology that Search Institute, which is did a lot of work, utilized. And I think it's a good one. I think that, here's somebody who is not your mom, not your dad, not necessarily, it may be a teacher, it may be, a faculty person, it may be the checkout lady at the, that is always there at the grocery store when you come through the line that you have this brief conversation with, but you might just really see something in him or her that you just want to get to know, or somebody you're working with, somebody, that person who has stuck in this, is not stuck in this job, but has kept with this job for a lot of years. And you just get this sense that there's some wisdom there. In
order for someone really to be a mentor, they do need to be at a different stage of their journey, that's something. So I want to come back to these things. So, again, so how to find a mentor, how to look for that. A couple things I heard you say is somebody with a certain my word would be a certain kind of stability or continuity in their life.
Yeah.
Someone who has what you look at and you think, oh, that person really seems to be engaged in life, right? They're not sort of just going through the motions on a day-to-day basis. And the other one in there, which may be a little trickier or maybe not, but that is, someone who has, whatever it is you think of as wisdom, right? Yeah.
Remember that wisdom can come from having made some real mistakes.
maybe only from that, I sometimes think, right?
Yeah. But that's very true. They can be in a very different life circumstance. I mean, I learned some real stuff back after my experience after college from folks who had served time in prison. I can't say that, I intentionally chose them as mentors, but did I learn and did they mentor me in some ways about not being so naive in some ways, which was a really important lesson at that point to learn, to know that idealized image of the world that I had, that it was all going to work out fine, was not necessarily true, because you can really make the misstep pretty quickly, and one misstep begets another.
The sort of phrase that came to my mind a minute ago when you were started off talking about non-parental guarantors.
Yeah.
And the phrase that came to my mind, which I think applies directly to, what a mentor looks like, is that it's someone who, I'll use the word, testifies or witnesses to the fact that a good, enjoyable life doesn't necessarily end at 25 or 35 or whatever we have in mind when we're, a young adults in particular, or even if we're 55 and thinking, man, my life's over now or at retirement or whatever, and to find somebody who's older, who's already past that threshold, or not necessarily older, right, but has already move to another stage of the journey. So
a key thing in a mentor is a non-peer who you feel like you can talk to. I encourage them, and I encourage them in my book, but I encourage them to really find and connect with people of different generations, and to look for that, and to ask questions. So what was it like when you were, in your 20s? What's your story about that? Start there, where you were when I'm here.
Well, and even from our own interests, like, okay, this is what's going on in my life. I wonder what, how did they, perceive that same life stage? That might have been really, really different, but there might be some similarities and commonalities as well. Almost always are, at least some of them.
And the thing that, and we were really careful about this with the listeners at the listening post, and this would be what I would say to those who are of our generation who are potentially in those places: be really careful about, saying the phrase, and don't do what I did.
Because you just you remove the possibility of them making maybe a really good mistake like you made.
Exactly. Yeah. Or you've got to do it just this way, recognize your own fallibility and where your own joy in the journey, that you did mess up sometimes.
I love that. I think you just put your finger on one of the ways to distinguish between wisdom and experience.
Yeah.
So wisdom looks at the experience and certainly doesn't want to offer its own experience as the perfect way of going about it. That's not the template for you.
Yeah, and that's where so often, the parent role. Parents do have, they can share a lot of experience and stuff, but they've got an agenda. This is your script. If other people have handed you a script, put it aside. Now begin to write your own. And that's where learning how that concept of unscripted, of learning how to now write your own and make your own choices and make your own steps and make your own mistakes and learn from those mistakes, is something that I wish, that every young adult, every person who's going through a transition could recognize. Okay, here's now I get to write.
So I want to summarize for a minute and invite you to expand possibly on this list. And, I guess, again, part of what has happened even this second time around is that we've ended up spending a lot of time about, not only community, but about mentors. And so I've got a few things down here about, where folks might look for mentors. And so I put down, for example, college, professors, maybe those kind of folks, volunteer organizations.
Yeah.
And then I particularly noted, multi-generational gatherings. What else comes to mind for you? About that? And maybe talk here about third places.
Oh, yeah. Well, the concept of third place is where it's not work, not home, but a place where you can gather. I mean, a bar can be a third place, a restaurant, a cafe, a coffee shop, a community center, workout place if there's a gathering area. Where as a young adult or as a person in transition, maybe looking for somebody to mentor them through, where can you connect with somebody and where, just looking around the room and say, what's that person's story? I'd really love to go on and ask it. Go on and say, hey, my name is such and such. Can I sit down and do you have time to talk? And that may turn into something of a further deeper conversation, or it may be an uncomfortable thing. So
there's some risk involved with it.
There is some risk involved.
You got to be involved. You got to be willing. You got to see the opportunities as strong enough to be willing to take the risks.
Yeah, and it may be, at a job, that person who's, worked the same job for a long time, just where are the opportunities? And it could be just a short conversation to check that out and, to learn something from that person. Every person in our life is there to teach us something. And it may be a very short lesson and it may be an extended opportunity to delve in depth. Who knows? But everything there is of value. So, the mentoring relationships, we think of those as these long-term, drawn-out things. They may be, but they may also be 5 minutes.
Interesting. I love it.
Yeah.
Which opens up all kinds of more opportunities, possibilities, and takes some of the risk out of it. Because if I'm only necessarily looking for a short thing, which might become longer, right? But it might not. I love that. That's a great perspective. Thank you.
I mean, I know I've learned some, had some great conversations, learned a lot from the person sitting next to me on the bar stool in Boone Saloon. Dad is he's 91 now, and he's wanting to share some wisdom. And I said, Dad, you want to share some wisdom, go to a coffee shop. Don't sit in your home and expect people to come to you. But so that's the other end of the spectrum. If you feel of the spectrum, if you've got some wisdom that you'd like to share, go find one of those third places, a cafe or something like that. And go sit and be open and receptive to those conversations. Even go up to a young person and say, hey, how you doing? The other end of that, every person is put into our life for us to get, to learn from. They're also put into our lives to give to teach. And, that perspective, and that's, we learn that in coaching, is an amazing thing to look around, how different the world would be if with the relationships that we have with people, even with strangers, is, what do you have to teach me?
Yeah.
And they're asking the same question.
And what I like about that is that, it acknowledges the win-win opportunities for those who might be hesitant to approach somebody about, even if you're not calling it mentorship, approaching them with that mindset and realizing that, you're offering them something else too, because there's every chance in the world that they will get a lot out of sharing that wisdom. Every bit as much as you may get from receiving it.
Yeah. And to be open to doing that, both receiving and offering, and to do it back to third places, because those are safe places. They're in public. They're intentionally those sorts of places where you're not in, you can have those public-private conversations that are safe. And if you need to exit, it's cool. Pay your tab, exit.
One or two open-ended coaching kinds of questions that you might ask, and that therefore somebody could ask themselves. With regard to I don't know any of this stuff we've talked about. What occurs to you?
I think what was a time in your life, that you wondered if you were on the right path, or if you were on the path that, I don't want to say right path, but
whether it was the right path for them. I mean, I think that's appropriate, right?
Where's the time where
the trip you wanted to on,
whether what you were doing was what you really wanted to be doing.
Okay, great.
How you were living is really how you wanted to be living. So that would be a question, which, and even now, how are you living what you are passionate about?
Nice. How do you live? How are you living out your passion?
Yeah.
I love it. Yep.
And what do you think you've contributed?
It's my last question. And this one's totally out of the blue. My question for you, Tommy Brown, is if you had to become either a frog or a turtle, which would you become and why?
Oh, I'd be a frog. Because I think that turtles have, that opportunity to draw in on themselves and not be vulnerable. Frogs are more vulnerable creatures, but I think that being able to leap out and, take that risk of jumping across the road and to climb trees and to, be that. I think that I'd be a frog.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. The theme music is Road Trip by Phil Rivas, used on a Creative Commons license. And don't forget to look at the Life Trippin' website for information about guests, upcoming episodes, and how to contact me, Dana Sutton, the Life Trip Coach. Go to www.lifetrippin.com. And until next time, keep on trippin'.